Hey, everybody, welcome. It is Wednesday, July 24th. I'm choking my way into the last week before the bar exam. Glad to have you all with us. Tracy is here. Tracy, why don't you talk while I try to clear my throat?
Hey, you all, it's a week until you get a chance to prove your professional competency, and you've got this. You rock. We're with you. We're so excited to have this group of candidates go into the exam. We think you've worked really hard. We think that many of you are very prepared to pass this exam. Please let us know how you do. That's important for our tracking and for us to celebrate with you or help you with what you may need to pass the next time. So please do let us know how you do. We were just talking about how we have seen so much progress in the work that our students are doing, the ones that have worked with us. So we hope that you're all getting ready, you're all fired up, and you're all ready to go next week.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to say, in terms of the post-exam protocol, you will get an email from me while you're at the exam. You'll get a bunch of emails from me leading up to the exam, but during the exam, I will send you a link to schedule what we call a post-mortem. It's a 15-minute call with me to just unburden yourself of whatever you remember about the exam. You are permitted to do that. I know that in some jurisdictions, they tell you stay away from those evil bar review people, but you're permitted to tell us about the test. In Florida, you're actually permitted to actually take the essays out of the room with you, and we'd love to see those. And then we will get the rest from the examiners down the road. But watch for that opportunity. If you'd like to take advantage of it, great. If you don't want to, that's fine too. We will not take you out of the course. So if you decide that you want to keep studying while you're waiting for results, you certainly can do that. If you feel like that might be a necessity, it's a good idea to talk to me, just because I'd like to find out why you think you need to do it, but it's certainly available to you and you can do that without a problem. So that's what will happen after the exam. There will obviously be emails. I think I forgot this morning's email, but it's coming. And you will be getting emails leading up and through every day of the test itself. I want to just briefly, we have a lot of questions. We asked people for their biggest challenge with a week to go, and we certainly got some of that. Anyway, there are a lot of questions. We want to get to those. I do want to remind you that we have a lot of last minute tools that you can still use. Things like the multi-state nutshells, the 5 for 5. We've had some people registering and still able to pick up those 5 calls before the bar exam. Amanda, Tracy, and I are all available, so you can do that. There's also a workshop for MBE, a workshop for performance tests, and a workshop for essay writing. So all of those things are there. If you're interested, you can also find them online in your online course. Just want to let you know that those tools are all there. You can still use them, and I think they're valuable for you as you go along. We're going to get to the questions, and then Tracy, I think your topic today is getting lost in the weeds, right?
Yes, I just put up in the chat box all of those tools that we have available still for this last week.
Great. Let's get to some questions. I think Bobka is going to try and join us, which will be a special treat, one of our coaches. I'm not sure if Amanda's coming on the call or not today. She's got a busy schedule, but I'm hopeful that she will join us as well. So if and when they arrive, we will jump them into the queue with us. Well, let's go ahead and get to the first question that we've got, and then we'll get to our biggest challenges near the end. A Florida student said, I watched the video on the changes in Florida alimony and wanted to check and make sure, did I understand what's changed? Let me just briefly say, for those of you in Florida, permanent alimony is no longer available. There is additional caps or durational caps on alimony. You should check the video. It goes through all of those items. Alimony laws in Florida now are retroactive. We haven't had that tested yet, but it's a possibility. And so without going into detail, there's just a lot of information around alimony. So if you have not looked at that video update, make sure you check it out in the domestic relations part of your Florida course. I do think it's testable in the exam. All right, next question that came up. Students said, I'm focused on essays this week. That's my weakest area, which is good. You should focus on your weak area generally. But the student said, do you have any sense as to what to focus on in terms of my exam? I understand that there's no way to know and it's more of a guess, but I'd appreciate any thoughts. Yeah, that's called the preview videos. And we did those for every jurisdiction. They're in lesson 1.5, regardless of which course you're in. You will find a 30-minute video that I recorded recently talking about the last exam and what I think is more prevalent in terms of trends for the upcoming exams. So if you haven't seen that, you probably ought to watch it. I think when we get down to this last week, the value of that video, it might be to steer you more towards one subject over another, as long as you've studied everything. But don't skip something because it's not on my list. And I think it's useful just to get a sense of what the exam is testing. Would say, check that out. Lesson 1.5, all of the courses, it's there. So far, these are not questions that Tracy has to answer, so she's very happy. The next question is, do you have the photo reading for the MBE webinar? Is it still available? The answer is yes. All of the photo reading webinars are available. You can find them in your online course to order. There's one for the MBE, there's one for essay writing, there's one for performance test. So if you want a brush up and you want a boost in how to apply photo reading to any of those areas, make sure you check out those webinars. They're all about an hour in length, and you can get instant access to all of them. All right, the next question was an interesting one. You might remember, Tracy, last week, Amanda was talking about her different approach to answering MBE questions, where she didn't even read the fact pattern. She just read the question and then answered the question without the fact pattern, which is something worth exploring. One student that worked with Amanda said that what they were doing on the MBE is that they were trying to rewrite the fact pattern in shorthand and then use symbols as they read it to process an excessive amount of time, and they weren't able to get through, or just barely got through 100 questions in 3 hours. I think this is a horrifically bad idea. The whole purpose of selective intuition is not to try and break the question down and to get caught up in the weeds of an MBE question. I think when you're trying to diagram it out and you're making shorthand notes and symboling it, that means that you're too far into the question. And you probably want to pull back and get a much higher level view of what's going on in the question so that you can answer it selectively in 90 seconds. Trying to get that kind of micro analysis of a question doesn't strike me as being positive.
I think it goes contrary to selective intuition. You don't need to diagram the MBE questions. You need to scan over the facts enough to know what topic area you're in so you can access it, right? And then get just a general idea of what happened. What is this, a robbery, a divorce? What is it? And then go look at the questions. And the questions should lead you to an answer. I think that taking time to put symbols and chart it all out, you save that for the essays and the MPT, not for the MBE.
Yeah, and a postscript to this is that after I talked to this student and basically read them the riot act and said, don't do it, they took another test and their scores went way up without doing that. It is just 1,000% easier. I think the fact that it's so easy is what scares people, don't you? It just doesn't seem like it should work. Just read a question and answer it instead of trying to think about it, because we're trained to analyze and think. But truthfully, it doesn't seem to make much difference, right?
It doesn't. If you've done your work, the information is already in your unconscious brain, and all you need to do is access that library. Just sit back, be on your heels, not so much on your toes, and let it come to you. It is more of a mental thing than it is a physical thing.
That's right. We talked about less hustle, more flow. And we didn't mean don't study by that. We just meant when you're in the test, when you're taking questions, don't try to hustle your way through the question. Maybe we should say less grind, more flow. Just let it flow. The remarkable piece is that whenever people use selective intuition, when we can break them of trying to answer a question with their conscious brain, their scores go up. They always go up. The conscious brain in this course is a useless appendage. We have done nothing for your conscious brain. Your conscious brain hates me. Your conscious brain thinks that I'm a fraud. Your conscious brain thinks that you're a crazy person, that you aren't doing what you were supposed to do. But the reality is that if you lean into the non-conscious, you'll see your scores get better. You'll see all sorts of things happening that are much better for you. So just keep that in mind as we're going along.
Well, we're working on it.
Okay, great. So in any event, hey, there he is. Hey, Babka, how are you, buddy? It's so great to see you. For those of you that don't know, if you haven't been on Babka's calls, Babka is a coach for us. And boy, I guess it's been a few years now that you've been coaching, right? Isn't that crazy?
3 years.
3 years. And we so appreciate it. And we know the students that are on your calls, I get raves. I know every Sunday afternoon I'm going to get at least a couple of emails, people going, Bobka took me to church today. We're really glad to have you. A week here before the bar exam, we're answering some questions from students. So I'm just going to throw them out here and then we'll toss them to you and Tracy and we'll see what we got. The next question was more of a comment from a student. They said, you mentioned during boot camp that all kinds of bizarre issues crop up before the exam. And then they proceed to tell me all the things that happened for them. There was a week-long big visit at work. Then they had a personal issue about stalking. Then there was an injured hawk falling out of the sky and hitting my car while I'm driving along the road. Really? And then an electric hedge trimmer accident lacerating one of their fingers. And so now they're typing pretty well with 9 fingers. Talk about being dedicated and requesting accommodations for the bar. I want to talk about this sense of everything falls in on you typically at the end here. And of course, there's all of the things that are happening nationally and politically. But as a bar taker, your job for the next 7 days is to just stay focused on the bar exam and not get caught up in this stuff. Bobka, I know you talk to your students about this a lot, right? To keep their attention and focus.
Oh, absolutely. I always say keep your eyes on the prize. Whatever is happening outside, you have no control over that. But you always have control over keeping your eyes on the prize and basically getting down to the grind, because life is going to happen. Stuff is going to happen that is beyond your control.
Right. And look, all of this stuff is going to be here in 10 days. And I think then you can focus on it. But as tempting as it is to get caught up in the drama, and the drama might be national politics, it might be family politics, it might be your neighbor, whatever it is, don't get caught up in that. For right now, blinders on, down and looking. Tracy, I don't want to steal your thunder about talking about getting out of the weeds, but that's really part of it, isn't it? Of not getting distracted.
It is. And really, where my thought came from was in reading your email that you sent out to all the students yesterday, the 8-day email.
Yeah.
So many of the questions that came into us was, oh my gosh, I did the practice tests over the weekend. They didn't go well. Oh, I'm freaked out. What should I do the next week? And then the cramming starts and just letting everything come in on you. Then you've got all this outside stuff, and maybe you've got your kids.
That's what I was just talking about.
So
Crazy,
she's got,
huh?
there's all this stuff going on that takes your focus away from what you need to be doing. Just focusing on your studies, getting prepared, getting your mindset right. Like we talked about last week, getting your clothes set out, making sure you have extra chargers. I talked to that same student about getting an external keyboard. Why? Because the keyboard buttons are further apart. What do I need to put together to be able to go in as my whole self next week and do what I am called to do, which is prove that I should be an attorney at law in this particular state?
Yeah. So, focus. It's all about focus right now. Absolutely. All right. Thanks. This was typical of the kind of questions that I got from people during the week. Somebody said, I just finished doing one of the OPEs. I don't know how many I got. I actually don't care because for the first time, I felt that I knew what I was doing and I felt comfortable with it. The reason that I want to give you that feedback is that Tracy's axiom about identifying the parties and their legal relationships doesn't just work for essays, but it works for MBE. I did that, and the immediate result is that the applicable law pops up. I'm able to almost immediately answer the question, and the answer option is right there, verbatim or very nearly rephrased. Tracy, I want you to talk a little bit about this if people haven't heard what you're suggesting here, because I think it's a useful tool for essays as well as multiple choice.
Thank you. I saw that comment too, and I was surprised, but when I thought about it, it makes sense. What I've been trying to tell you on the FLA forum is that your very first sentence of your fact pattern should be to identify the legal relationship of the parties. Why? Because that sets out the duty of care. Then when you have the duty of care, that leads you right to why is this thing in court? Why is there a problem? What's the breach? What's the alleged breach? And then if it's tort, you're going to move to proximate cause. If it's other things, you're going to move to causation, damages, and injuries. So if you start with a legal relationship of the parties, for instance, landlord-tenant, the landlord has a heightened duty of care towards the tenant. If it's a simple contract case and the tenant isn't paying the rent, you know that the duty is to pay the rent. And then you're looking for the breach and the causation and the damages. So it really does get you kick-started and lead you all the way through the question and should lead you right to the answer. If you know the legal relationship of the parties, you should be able to intuit what the answer should be.
Babka, in your practice, that's what you do as a lawyer, isn't it? I say this as
Absolutely.
an
I mean,
academic, but yeah, go ahead.
absolutely, because if you don't know the parties, what are you doing? You're not going to find a solution without going to the underlying problem. And to Tracy's point, I think for purposes of the bar exam, you have to differentiate the parties. What is the issue in control? Why are you guys for me? And then for MBE purposes, these are your answer options. Then you select the best one and you keep it moving.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've had a lot of stories this week of people who've had big jumps of increases in their practice exam scores, almost always when they were using selective intuition, when they were leaning back and not trying to hyperanalyze questions. The more they press, the worse it gets. That's the irony of this test. And so I've had some students that said, and we've got a question coming up, somebody said, I keep getting 50 out of 100. That's all I'm getting. And they're doing it harder, and I want to work harder and do more. The reality is working harder doesn't get you more correct answers here. If you've done the work and you're studying, and I knew that student had, it literally means giving up control. And I think that's one of the hardest things for a bar applicant is to do that sort of trust exercise where you fall backwards, right? When you are trusting, at least trusting your own non-conscious, trusting what you photo read, trusting what you mind mapped, and just answering the questions, you're going to get more right. I can guarantee you that this student that's getting 50 out of 100 is trying to manually adjust in the questions. And that 50 out of 100 is about what you get when you're trying to work from here. That's the reality. So even the people that pass the exam that don't know anything about photo reading or selective intuition, they don't recognize what they're doing, but what they're doing is they're operating from the non-conscious. They're just intuitively answering questions. We'll talk more about this.
I love that image you have of falling back into it. And I think of the tree, which is the mind map, and you're just falling back into to the boughs and the arms of the tree and letting the tree hold you. That imagery, when you allow yourself to fall back, comes out to protect you, comes out to give you what you need. If you're doing a criminal, you look very quickly, you see it's a criminal situation, it's a defendant, or maybe it's a suspect at this point, and police, and then you just scan and that the suspect makes some kind of statement, you're going to be dealing with Miranda because you've got that on your mind map and this is where this is going. Once you figure that out and you know what the basic core law is that you're going to be tested on, like Babka said, you turn to the answers and it's going to be right there. It's going to be right there because you mind mapped it and you get that imagery in your head. What are the things about Miranda? Oh yeah, time, place, circumstance, bang. And you know the answer right in front of you. It's not that difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we'll talk more about this as we move along. Does photo reading work if music is playing in the background? The answer is yes. You can photo read on the light rail in the airport in all kinds of settings with all kinds of distractions because your brain and your eyes are taking in the material no matter what's going on. Now, I think there's better and worse music to play. We've suggested, and in your course, there's actually some study music built in the assignments at the very end of the course in the self-care center. So definitely should check that out. But yes, you can play music. Now, I think the reason that this student was asking that question is that they sent me their bar exam playlist. So I'm going to put it up in the chat because I started listening to it and it was awesome. It's a great playlist. It's got a lot of, it pumps you up, but in the middle of it, there is that very famous never give up motivational speech. I think Babka's heard it. Tracy, you've heard it. It's pretty amazing. It's about a 10-minute monologue. Shout out to Candy for her playlist. This is hers. If somebody else has a playlist and you want to post it in the community group, by all means do it. These are great playlists to get going. Did you pump yourself up with music, Babka, when you were studying for the bar? Music?
Yeah, I think there's this one, I'm Unstoppable. I had a small catalog of music. Like every morning before I sit down when I'm having my morning coffee, I just play the music just to get my head right in the game and then go.
Great. Yeah, I really love that, Tracy.
I didn't use music. I don't think music had been invented when I took
It
the
had, no, they were still pounding on wooden walls, on the stone walls. All right, that makes me the dinosaur. All right, next question, a little more serious sense. Any suggestion for MBE practice after I get settled into the testing location next week if I'm traveling? I was thinking of doing sets of 25 questions for a single area subject. Does that make sense? And I'm going to throw this to Bob and Tracy as well. My sense is if you've identified a weakness in a particular subject, let's say evidence is scoring lower for you than anything else, then absolutely go to the evidence questions and stay in that category and just work those questions, 5 questions, 10, 15, 25, whatever it might be. But make sure that you're spending time looking at the answer explanations and make sure that you're answering the questions in 90 seconds, that you're staying in that phrasing or that posture of what it takes to answer the question in that time. If you don't see any broad weakness, then I think you can jump, for example, in the online program, we've got an 800 question database, which is really almost all of these sort of miscellaneous questions, and they come up randomly. This is not to see how many you get right, but as you're doing questions, if you just want to have the experience of jumping from one subject to the other, that's a good way to do it. You just set a timer and you do 10 questions in 15 minutes. Tracy, what would you say about practicing when you get into your testing center, which for most people will be in the next few days?
Yeah, I think if you're going to do one subject, you should photo read your outline on that subject first and look at your mind map and then do your questions, look at the answers, and then have your mind map handy so that you can make small corrections to it, small additions or clarifications to it. Make sure you don't have too many words, but this is a great time to focus in on that. You don't need to go back and listen to all the lectures again. You might want to get the nutshells, though. If you're really scoring poorly in one area, the nutshells might be really good for you in the next week. But yep, whatever works for you. I would probably do it that way rather than jump around. That's just how I am. I like to focus on one thing at a time. Maybe you're a smorgasbord type of person. I don't know.
I like that smorgasbord. Okay.
Smorgasbord. Just go with what works for you.
Bobka, what's your thought?
I would say, depending on their comfort level, if they have a certain area of weakness, 10, 15 questions, evidence, common law, you do those questions under time conditions. The secret is review those questions after you're done, because practice makes the master. And at the same time, the practice questions supplement the substantive materials. If you don't review those questions, you miss out on a lot of information that can come in handy down the road. So I would say, if it's a particular area, 10, 15 questions, time conditions, review it. If the person is much more comfortable, maybe do 25, 50 time conditions, and then review it as well. But it's not just about doing quality over quantity anytime.
Yeah, I think that's really true. It's not quantity, it is quality, and you don't want to exhaust yourself. So you want to work in small bursts. And of course, I'll be sending emails throughout the weekend talking about what I want you to do, and even emails Monday night, Tuesday morning, Tuesday night. So there's a lot of direction that we'll offer you when you get to that spot. All right, let's turn to biggest challenge responses, because those are always interesting. First biggest challenge, avoiding the temptation to memorize it. I know enough to pass. I don't have to memorize. Tracy, how do you respond to when somebody says their biggest challenge is they want to memorize?
Go back to your mind map. Don't memorize, but take a photo of the image that's in front of you. It will be there when you need it then. There are some key phrases that you need to know in con law. You do have to have them in your head, so you can practice those. Like I just went through one with Miranda, time, place, and circumstance. You do need to know that, but it's not memorization. I didn't write it on a flashcard and say, oh my goodness, I hope that comes up today so I can show what I memorized. No, it is through working with the material. As I've told you this whole time, it's being relational in the subject matter. What relates to what, and memorization isn't going to get you anywhere when the test comes. That's a transactional way of working. You need the relational way of working. The relational way is seeing what the relationship is between the parties. What is the relationship of the subject matter to what's happening, the basic story in the fact, and how does it relate to the questions you're being asked? That's how you move through a question. It's also how you move through an essay, because all you're doing in the essay is writing the opening statement. That's all relational. Judge, these are the parties. This is how they relate. This is why we're in court. This is what the dispute is. This is what the plaintiff's going to argue. This is their theory of the case. And this is the law you're going to hear that'll back it up. And judge, it's not just the plaintiff in the courtroom, the defendant's in the courtroom too. And this is their theory of the case. And this is the law that they're going to bring to your attention. But at the end of the case, Your Honor, I want you to rule in favor of the plaintiff. And this is why, because this is the application. So you see how everything flows one from the other. Everything relates one to the other. You can't memorize that. You learn the flow, and then the flow shows you how to do it.
Yeah. Buck, I know that when you first started studying for the exam and you weren't successful, you were in that memorization mode. You worked really hard, but there was a ceiling to what you could memorize, right? And it wasn't you got away from that it really opened up for you.
And memorization, it takes its own toll. I don't know, I think it's 14 courses that we have, and there is no way on God's green that you're going to memorize every single thing of every. I think it's impossible. And we as humans, we want to control what we intake. Meanwhile, it's let it go. And then you just trust the process, and then you see that you material that you don't know how, you can't explain how you know about it. And that's just how it is. That's chaos, literally. So I would say stay away from memorization. Just let yourself go with the flow of the material. And then it's going to come to you much easier without that pressure of wanting to know every single thing. It's impossible.
Yeah, good advice. Along the same lines, I'll throw this back to you, Babka. Another student said, my biggest challenge is I'm overwhelmed and I have performance anxiety. That's a real thing, isn't it? That sense of pressure and tension, and you feel overwhelmed at the end. And the overwhelm tends to force us back into old patterns like memorization and issue spotting and some of these other things. What techniques would you recommend, Babka, to help deal with that overwhelm and anxiety here at the end?
I would say sometimes it's okay to take a step back. You take a step back and then you just close your eyes, breathe in and out for 30 seconds. That works for me, because if you're overwhelmed and then everything is coming in on you at the same time, you don't have that space to breathe. You don't have that space to breathe. You're going to enter into panic mode. So take a step back, breathe, 30-second breath, and at the same time, you got this. Give yourself that reassurance that you got this. You've studied hard from when you started studying to date. Don't let a slight 5-minute distract you from the progress you've done over time. I think that's how I would look at it.
Yeah, I think performance anxiety comes from trying to anticipate the future. It's not in this moment, you're okay, right? You're here, you're right now, you're okay. It's the what ifs, it's the parade of horribles that then start to build up, and then we get the overwhelm. Tracy, I know you and I talk a lot about the superego and that sense of you're not good enough, and it starts to build up and feel like it's going to blow up in your brain. Do you think that's behind this overwhelm for a lot of people and anxiety?
I think it is, because the superego has had the role since you were probably 5 or 6 years old of coming in to be your protector when you didn't know what to do, or when the superego thought you weren't doing what you should be doing. So it's super important that you tell your superego, thank you for protecting me, but I don't need you to protect me today. Go over there and sit in the corner and cheer me on. Don't be afraid of nervous energy. Nervous energy is a good thing. It's actually your friend and your ally when you sit down to do this test, because when you are nervous and you have a little bit of anxiety, what happens? All of your senses come to play. You see more clearly, you're hearing things, you're feeling things, maybe you're tasting, the water that you have there. You come alive. So don't be afraid of that. Bring it in, channel it, and use it to your advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are great suggestions. All right, next biggest challenge is getting in my own way. I have plenty of outside distractions, but I struggle with compartmentalizing so that I can keep studying. Tracy, what would you say about that?
The outside distractions need to be put aside. Anything that isn't essential for the next week. needs to be put aside. If your dog is something that distracts you all the time, maybe having someone in the family watch your dog for a few days would be a good idea. If you are the one that takes your child to and from school all the time, maybe there's somebody else that can help you out with that. Don't be afraid to ask for help so that you can clear the deck and get back to the work you need to do.
Babka, any thoughts about this idea of getting out of your own way?
Yeah, and I would say it's all about putting the blindfolds on. Like I said, so long as it's not life-threatening, or if it's spouse, child, those ones you can control. But if it's something outside your control, blindfolds in, because at this moment in time, you have to be intentionally selfish. Anybody that has a problem with that, you can deal with them after the exam. But right here, right now, it's all about you. It's all about the work that you've done leading up to this moment. Let nobody or nothing compromise that. And at the same time, your energy as well. You have to protect your space, your bubble, all of that. And if you let people just keep coming in and injecting that, affecting your space and your energy, that's going to be a problem as well. I will deal with it after the exam. This moment, I am dealing with me right now.
Yeah, being selfish is okay right now. So encourage that. All right, thank you. Next question. This was interesting. We said, what's your biggest challenge? And somebody wrote back immediately and said, it's the application of the Florida long arm statute. That was an interesting response. First of all, there might be one multiple choice question in Florida on that topic. That will not change your results on the bar exam. I guarantee that. But I thought it was an interesting one in the sense that there may be some rule of law, some principle that at the end is bothering you. So what do you do when you've got any principle of law that's bothering you? And here's what I would do, and I'll throw it to our experts here as well. I would take that term, I would go to the digital book, and I would type in that term so that I can find it in the materials. Then I would go to the question book that's relevant for that, and I would type that same term in to see if there are any questions that test that particular term, essays or multiple choice. And then I would look from that standpoint and see what I've got to do with it and look at my mind map and see what I've got there. And by the way, the Florida long arm statute isn't any different than any other state's long arm statute, basically. So you go to the federal civil procedure jurisdiction, you'll see those rules. But isn't it interesting how we get caught up on a particular principle of law and it suddenly looks like it's massively big to us when in fact, I watched both of your eyes went, really? That one thing is it? Tracy, what do you do when you get to those kinds of topics?
What I really hear in this student's question is overwhelmed. It's not about the long arm statute at all. It's about, oh my gosh, there's these big things, rule against perpetuities. I've never understood it. And I still don't understand it. And oh my God, how am I going to do this on the long arm statute? And just break it down. And your suggestions are great. Just lean into it and find out. But ask yourself, what is really going on here? What is really going on? What is really in front of me here? And what is my super ego saying to me right now? Because that's what I hear in there.
Okay, great. Babka, any thoughts?
It's impossible to know everything about the law.
Right.
I've been practicing for 3 years. If you ask me what's the rule in Shelley's case, I don't know. And I took comfort in knowing that I did not need to know everything for the bar exam. Whatever knowledge I had at the time I walked into that hall, it was enough for me to pass. So in as much as you want to know every single thing, it's impossible. Just be comfortable with what you know. And at the same time, as a lawyer, you have to think creatively. Your creativity is going to have to come in. You might not need to give the word, answer the question verbatim as it is. Be creative. You just have to show that you understand the question. And then at the same time, you can explain it in your own words. Go to the bottom of every single legal concept.
Yeah, and it's funny how we start to get into that fear of missing out, right? If I don't know everything, I'm not going to be successful. That's just not true. It's setting a bar that's too high and it's giving yourself permission to fail, and you don't need to do that. So be practical.
If you're in the MBE and there's a question that comes out on the rule of Shelley's case, I kind of remember hearing about that in law school. I couldn't even tell you what that's about. And if that happens and you can't even figure out what it is, just skip the question. Put your answer down if you need to. Pick the letter and move on. If you have time, you can come back to it, but don't get hung up there. Don't get hung up and don't lose confidence.
We're not going there. It's property. Okay, so you
I
guys
was
are
just
scaring me.
kidding.
You're scaring me.
I'm kidding.
All right. Next, we got a lot of questions that dealt with the biggest challenge being time management in terms of answering questions. I can't get essays written under time conditions. I can't get MPTs written under time conditions. I can't get through the MBE in time conditions. And I know that this is a real challenge for foreign trained attorneys. Bob can speak to that. I know it's there. I'm going to give some tough love today on this. Okay. Maybe I'm wrong to do this. Knock it off. Stop making excuses. You can do all of this in the time conditions that you're given. It becomes a crutch and an excuse. And when you say, I can't write an essay in my time frame, that's not really true. If the incentive were great enough, if I had a hostage picture, which is really a gross example, if I had a hostage picture of your pet, Fluffy, and I said, if you ever want to see Fluffy again, you got to write this essay, 750 words in 30 minutes. And you really love Fluffy, you'd write that essay. There's no question in my mind about it. The problem is that we give ourselves permission and then we say, it's not really my fault. I'm a victim because I don't speak English well and it's not my first language, or I can't quite understand this. And I just got to say, there comes a point when you're practicing law, you don't get that opportunity. You can't turn to your client and say, hey, you know what? I suck. I don't have any idea what I'm doing and I can't resolve this case. That is not what happens. It's a crutch. And so while we could talk about ways to go faster, and we have with most of you, the reality is if you're still having timing problems today, it's because you want to have timing problems. That's going to really piss off some people, isn't it? That's the reality. You could change that as soon as you decide to change it. So that's my take. Now, Tracy, I'll let you be more relational and softer there because I've just given the hard line.
If you use FLA, you can write this answer in 30 minutes, no problem, because FLA is very concise. If you are running out of time, go back and look at your fact paragraphs. Are you putting too much in there? Start with the legal relationship of the parties. Say 1 or 2 sentences about what generally, and then state at the bottom who is suing who and why. Move on. Your law paragraph is only 4 sentences. And you're really just talking about the theory of the case for the one side, which is 1 sentence, and the basic law that's going to back that up, and the opposing theory of the case, and the law that they're going to use to back that up. And then your analysis part doesn't have to be long and drawn out, but you do have to bring the facts into it. It's designed to help you do this in half an hour. That's why I don't call it FLA. I call it FLAT, because timing is really important with it. If you follow FLA, then the T is going to come with it.
What do you say when somebody says, I just can't read and comprehend fast enough?
To your point, it's more of an excuse mechanism. And second of all, how hungry are you to want to become an attorney? Because if you're that hungry to become an attorney, I think you're supposed to be unstoppable. Nothing is supposed to make you not want to achieve what you want to achieve. So if it's not substantive, you can get the essay done. And to Tracy's point, you have to go straight to the point. Don't volunteer information that is not being asked. Go straight to the point. FLA, up till now, as a practice, when I submit pleadings to court, I use the FLA format, and I got queried by a judge last week, and he was like, what is this? I'm like, this is the best brief I've ever seen. I was like, okay, that's good. So when, oh, I can't do it. Yes, you can, because you want to be an attorney, you have to do this. Set your mind to it, get it done, become an attorney. When you become an attorney, you can take 2 days to write a brief. That's fine.
Yeah, this particular student I really admire and respect, so don't misunderstand me, but I think that part of what happens is that people get into a victimization mindset and they start thinking, I just can't do it because it's not my first language. Part that's unsaid is the test isn't fair because of that. That may be true, but the test is what the test is. You have to, they won't give you accommodations for English as a second language. They've never done it. So you have to adapt to that. And part of that is that you need to put yourself in an English bubble. Now, the week before the exam, it's a bit late to do that. But I know this student well enough to know that if they actually had to write in a half an hour or had to get the 100 questions done on the MBE in 3 hours, they could do it. The problem is this fear that says I've got to read it and understand it and know everything. And so I'm going to read word for word in an MBE fact pattern instead of just getting the 30,000-foot view of the problem, saying, oh, this is a problem about the rule in Shelley's case, and here's the answer that I would come up with, and move on. You don't have to grind through any part of the test. And this is the thing that I think is so tough for people when they get down near the end. Challenging for sure, but I believe ultimately could be resolved. Last biggest challenge I want to get to before we get to Tracy and Bobka's closing comments. Student said, I've taken all these practice MBEs, I'm reviewing my wrong answers. What can I do to increase my MBE scores above this 50 average that I'm at? And we've talked about this throughout today's session. It is literally just giving up control. It is letting your non-conscious run the show. When someone is showing less than 60 out of 100 questions correct, I guarantee that what that means is they're operating from the conscious brain and they are not working from the non-conscious. As soon as you make the switch back to the non-conscious, you answer quickly and intuitively, you trust the process, you're going to see the results. But until you're willing to do that, there's no technique we can give you that's going to magically improve your scores because we've already given it to you. It's not a complicated process. It's just you have to have the trust in the process. And I think that's what it comes down to. Tracy, any thoughts, any final thoughts about that?
No.
Okay. So let's do this. We've got a couple minutes left. Let's go to your comments about being in the weeds. And then Bobka, if you'll stick around, we'll let you wrap up here for our group and we'll go from there. So Tracy, the floor is yours.
Right. As I tell you this story, I want you to apply it to your own bar study journey. So I decided I was going to go out and clean up my garage. It has needed it for some time. I set a specific period of time to go work on my garage, and I went out there and started looking around and seeing where I wanted to start. There were so many options that I had. I could work on all the spray bottles, I could work on cans, I could work on the millions of pairs of left-hand gloves that I had. I could work on scoopers. And I saw this lawn weed, feed, weed, and moss killer too. And I started to think, where could I put that? Where could I put my sprinkler system? And as that went along, and I was trying to figure out where should I start first in my sorting process, I really came up with some good ideas about that. And I started to get some bags and put some things where they belonged. But lo and behold, I saw out in my yard a bunch of weeds. I had this weed killer. Maybe I should stop working on sorting out my garage and cleaning that out, which was my original project. And maybe I should move and pull weeds because those weeds were out there. And maybe I didn't realize that they were there, or maybe I've just been ignoring them, but they were there and they caught my attention. So I grabbed the moss and weed killer and I took that out there and I sat down with my gloves and started pulling weeds. Now, my garage is not getting cleaned out. As you know where this is going, right? I'm sitting out here and I'm doing these weeds for a few hours, and then I'm just completely exhausted. I'm tired, I'm hot, sweaty. I think, my gosh, these weeds, I had them all under control a few weeks ago, and now they're just coming back, and they're going to keep coming back. And they're always going to be there, and it's such a distraction. And why can't you keep up with the weeding? What's wrong with you? And my super ego is just going on and on. You went out to work on your garage, and now you're working on the weeds, and you're not getting either one of them done. You're so stupid. I can't believe that you couldn't get this done. So the garage didn't get sorted out. The weeds didn't get all pulled. And all I did was exhaust myself and make myself hot and sweaty. What's the moral of this story? Don't get lost in the weeds. Focus on what you're doing. Be intentional. You have a week to go. Let the weeds be there. They're always going to be there. You could go out and pull every one of the weeds and you'd still have weeds next week. Leave the weeds alone. Be intentional. Focus on your work because you got this and you rock. And that's what I want to tell you at the end of this little talk and the end of our time working together. You got this and you rock. Let everything else go for this week. It'll still be there when you get on the other side of the exam. Focus, be intentional, tell your super ego to go take a seat and go in there and rock this thing next week, because you know you can. We're with you.
Thank you. Thanks, Trace, for all of your support and work in this coaching season. And I know it's been a big help to people. Bobka, you've been a rock for us for years, and I know that you got a lot of fans and a lot of successful applicants who look back and say, oh man, I miss those calls with Bobka. You've been in the chair where these applicants are. You have been through the frustration of not being successful, and yet you found a way, you turned it around. And I know that's the message that you often teach during your coaching calls. But with these last few days ahead, what would you say to our audience, both here with us live today, but going to be watching over the next couple of days as they get ready for the exam next week?
I would say trust in your gut, trust in yourself, trust in the work you're putting from day one right up until today. Don't stress yourself about not knowing everything. It's impossible to not know everything. And at the same time, self-care is important. Tune out the noise. Take care of yourself. Have a rest. Go swimming, whatever you have to do that. Don't be so hard on yourself. The exam is on the horizon, that is true. Anxiety is going to be there. Embrace the shit, but don't let it control you. Control your emotions, because when you become an attorney, your emotions might get the better of you. And this is exhibit A of you trying to rein in your emotions to get the better out of you. Have good rest, sleep, eat good food, and at the same time, let it go. Don't try to control everything. For anything or anybody that is trying to, how can I contaminate your energy, put them to the side. Anybody is mad at you, they can get with the IRS later. We will talk about it after the exam. And this is a secret that I've always shared. When you're doing your MBEs, if you hear Jackson yelling at you during the course of the exam, don't change your answers. Please follow that advice. Because I did, like I was taking the exam in the middle of COVID and Jackson was literally yelling at me. Don't change your answers. And lo and behold, my MBE score improved from 119 to 145. Trust in your gut, trust the process, have self-care. You got this. That's all I'll say.
Yeah. Thank you, Bobka. It's great to see you. Thanks for sharing your experience and your wisdom. I think what I'll leave you all with is this is my probably 70th or some big number of exams that I've taken people through. The exam continues to be difficult, probably tougher today than it's ever been. The challenges are greater than they've ever been. The environment is more hostile for most of you than it's ever been. I am more confident going into this exam with the students that we've been working with and their ability to be successful on this test. I think we're going to see really good results for our students. That you still have the opportunity in the next 6 days to make incredible strides in your performance, not because you'll necessarily learn a lot more, but because you'll learn the things that give you the additional little pieces. And sometimes those little pieces make a big difference. The fundamentals of what we've been teaching you in this course have never changed. The writing style, the approach to MBEs, the approach to controlling your emotions, the things you heard from Tracy and from Bobka, what you've been hearing from Amanda, what you heard from June and Brianna, what you heard from Megan, what you heard from me. All of those things have been consistent, and they've been focused on the idea that you're capable, you're competent, you can do this. The only reason that people don't pass the exam is because they stop believing that they're capable of passing. And if you don't believe you're capable of passing, there's nothing we can do that will give you that magic feather that will help you fly. You have to believe that you can do it. And so as you use these next 6 days, work as though you plan on those 2 days next week as being the start of your legal career and not the end of your bar exam career. And when that happens, it'll come true. And it always does. All I want you to be able to do when the test is done is to walk out and say, I did the best I could do, and I'm proud of my effort. And then we'll let the examiners do their job and we'll see what happens. We're going to take a couple of weeks off, as we usually do after the bar exam. So we won't be doing these sessions for a couple of weeks. You will have the opportunity to do a one-on-one call with me if you're taking the July exam. For those of you studying in 2025, we have a lot of information to share with you. We'll be putting that out via podcasts. We have information about the changes coming to California. We have our interview with the NCBE representatives. We have a lot that we want to talk about, but we wanted to keep today's focus just on our July students. So for all of you taking the exam in a few days, best wishes, safe travels, stay healthy, do all the things we've asked you to do, but mostly just believe in yourself and believe that you've got this. And we'll see you on the other side when they start to call you counselor. Thanks, Tracy. Thanks, Babka. See you later.